Next, from Springfield, we talked to Dalitso Sulamoyo, President and CEO of the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies, about the struggle to provide social services for the state's most vulnerable during the current budget impasse. This runs about 10 minutes.
Dalitso Sulamoyo, thanks for joining us, and we should tell our viewers you're a member of the Illinois Channel Board of Directors, but you're also, for the purposes of this interview, you're the head of the Illinois Community Action Agencies, which run the LIHEAP program, and very representative of one of the social agencies that have been kind of caught up in this tug of war over the budget. There was an effort this week in the state legislature to pass a piece of legislation that would allow the state, authorize the state to let the federal dollars that come into the state budget to be spent. And your organization gets quite a lot of, in fact, the preponderance of your budget. Tell us how this legislation, if it were to be passed, what would it do for your organization, its ability to meet its mission?
So right now, because of the fact that we don't have access to these federal dollars, which, as you pointed out, 90% of the funding that my agencies receive are federal dollars. And since July 1st, with this budget impasse, we have not been able to access federal dollars to pay for services, to keep our agencies open. By the end of last month, we started to see many of our agencies begin to close their doors. And most of my organizations are not-for-profit entities, so it doesn't mean that they're sitting there on a huge reserve of funds. And in some cases, some of them have had to go to banks to get lines of credit to keep their doors open and to keep services. So this bill means a great deal to us because it means that we can resume services to our seniors who rely on some of the programs that we operate, senior meals programs. We can begin to provide services to children, infants and children, and hopefully we can also get back to providing LIHEAP services. And so this is a critical piece of legislation that we see as a lifeline to many of our organizations that are suffering right now without having access to resources.
So right now, it's the heat of August, but it won't be obviously that long before the weather's going to turn. And at what point do you start signing people up typically to get heating assistance for the winter?
Typically September 1st, but because of the fact that we don't have any funding right now, those dates have been pushed back to October. So October 1st will be when we should begin to serve seniors and households with disabilities, and then November is when we're going to begin to serve households with children under the age of 6, and then December we would open it up to everybody else.
And did your organization take a position on the legislation? There was the discussion about whether the House should pass a version that was like the Senate, where it's $4.8 billion of just federal dollars. The House approach was to tack on some general revenue funds. Did your organization lobby one way or the other?
We did not take a position on the additions that were made because clearly we understand why those programs are critical. What we were hoping for is at least passage of this bill as it was passed by the Senate so that we could hopefully have it signed this week and get all these organizations back up and running. But there may be delays to that, given some of the work that has to be done on the bill.
Do you know, how does this work? Do you know, is that money, the federal dollars, have they already been sent to the state, or are they just sitting there so that if the governor signed a bill today, which he can't do, but if he did sign it today, how quickly could that money get into your organization's bank account?
We have programs such as the Community Services Block Grant, which we already do have those resources. The state has those resources in place. And then there's some other federal programs that we operate that the funds are already with the state, and as soon as the governor signs the legislation, we would begin to have access to those funds.
How many, you have social service, you have your agencies located throughout the state where people can go and apply for LIHEAP assistance. How many different offices do you have around the state?
We have 35 agencies that operate the LIHEAP program, and we are in every county of the state.
And how many of those are still operating given the lack of funding?
Based on the data that we were provided, I would say that 20 of them are either closed or partially open. So that represents about, well, more than 50% of our agencies. And as long as this continues to drag on, we will see many of them continue to close. Now, I do have agencies that receive federal funds directly from the federal government, but majority of them, the funds come through the state of Illinois.
And they have to pay rent on their locations and all. If there's much of a delay, much more of a delay, and there would be at least a week delay, there could be 2 or 3 weeks delay. At what point how complicated is it going to be to turn those lights back on in those offices, or do the landlords say, you know, get out because you're not paying the rent?
Well, I can speak it from a programmatic standpoint. I mean, there are some programs that we have staff who are, you know, trained, and it's a highly technical program like weatherization. I think that you've covered, you know, with your organization. We have to have those staff trained and certified, and if those staff have found employment elsewhere, it's going to create an organizational burden for our agencies to resume weatherization services because they won't have staff in place that are certified to do the work. So that will be one of the challenges. And then with other programs that we operate, you know, those staff probably have hopefully have found employment elsewhere, but that will be a loss to our organizations, and it will be very difficult for us to just right away pick up and start operating programs. So it's going to be a challenge.
Just to remind people, how many homes, how many people were served by LIHEAP?
Combined federal and state dollars, 420,000 households. And just the state funds alone last year was about 150,000 households.
And what are you telling lawmakers? How critical is this, not only for your organization, but for those people who get the assistance?
Well, I mean, we're now over a month into this budget impasse, and clearly this has had an impact on not just my organizations, but most importantly on the individuals that we serve. We serve collectively over 1 million individuals in the state of Illinois, and in the month of July alone, we have denied services to over 70,000 individuals. And that's just in 1 month that we haven't been able to serve individuals. And so it is really critical for us to pass this legislation, to get to a budget resolution so that we can get back to the business of helping people.
All right, Dalitso Sulamoyo, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you.